I first met George McCutcheon in 1952 when I was a teaching assistant in the General College in the Social Studies Division, and became more acquainted with him when I joined the faculty in 1960 and stayed there until 1967. George was always known for his willingness to work with students of every kind and every need, and did everything he could to help in their education. He retired the year, I think it was the year that I came back to the General College in late 1979, and so I didn't get to have much contact with him after that, but he always contributed so much to the education of the student in the university. I'm Jean Lupton. I was former dean in the 1980s.
My name's Dave Giese, and I joined the General College in 1954 as an undergraduate paper grader, and my first assignment really was to be the undergraduate paper grader for George. I taught with him in mathematics for a number of years and spent a lot of time with him as he helped me learn statistics for the first time. And, like a lot of people, we all learned a lot from George about teaching. He was a wonderful teacher, spent all of his time working with, thinking about students, willing to work with students, regardless of their learning problems or their abilities. He would spend more time with them than any other faculty member that I know.
I'm not walking out of you, Joseph, but I've got the 12
If this were a friends meeting, we'd probably sit and think for a while before we got it. In 1953, as a new, I've been a graduate student, as a new full-time instructor in General College, I was assigned a desk next to George McCutcheon in second floor Northeast Nicholson Hall, room 202. Now, 50 years ago is not long by geologic standards, but it is about a third the age of either the University of Minnesota or the state of Minnesota, and it's about 70% of the time there has been a General College. We were instructors in the physical science and math division, which was actually, the divisional structure was new that year. Everybody who was given full responsibility for a class was an instructor. The salary might have been a hair over a TA's, but it was full-time, not half. I think my salary was something like $3,400. We had desks, not cubicles. The separate rooms, 202A and B, were occupied by Professor Rassweiler, the head division, and Merle Harris. Some instructors could be hired with the expectation that they might stay and get PhDs. That was handy because the university cannot give degrees to its own professors. Now, our experience before this varied all over the place. George is the one who had taught all over the state. The rest of us came from elsewhere. Then we were working on PhDs which were obtained in that year 57, 58. Three of us got it. Now the third person was Norman Mohn. Catherine, who always was the one who could phrase things in a more flashy way than either the other two. He said, you know, we've been at this for quite a while. At that time, work was measured in man hours. You know, most FTEs are not gender specific, but his point was that the three of us together had taken, the amount of work required for a PhD was about a third of a graduate student's century. And the subjects which we were working on were quite varied too. Norman's was on James Stewart, 6th of Scotland, 1st of England. Mine was on magnetic resonance, not the imaging, the spectroscopy. But George's had much more to do with what we were actually doing. It was on testing. He specifically math and science. For a long time I thought it was on the General College comprehensive exam, because he was my expert on the comprehensive for things like what difficulty and discrimination indexes are, how you get them, what means that all of we had other experts around, like Henry Barrow was the one who told us what kind of questions we should ask on what kind of subjects. His PhD thesis is a very interesting thing for a number of reasons. One thing is he gave 8th grade achievement tests all over the state in both general science and in mathematics, and general mathematics. He ended up giving it to 6,400 students all over the state, dealt with 65 superintendents, 70 principals, 5,000 tests, everything was, all the answer sheets were corrected twice independently, some by people like Merrill Rasweiler, and I think Merrill got in on this one too. He gives thanks to Merrill and Irene Rasweiler for having helped him enough so that he can expect nothing less than sincerest, lifelong, professional, and personal loyalty. Well, that's George using the word loyalty, and it meant it was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful thing for people in that college to deal with, on that level with everybody. He had done this stratified random sample of schools all over the state and delivered them, most of them himself. The conclusions were supposed to be valid for all 8th graders. He'd written all the tests, all the items, the teacher questionnaires, all kinds of stuff like that. Tested them first on 800 students, done pilot works, got answers on 11,000 punch cards. That was how computing was done for him. And then and 2,000 cards with answers and all that sort of thing. And then he found out things. The test he didn't give was the Otis Intelligence test, and he found out that the student, and a lot of things, and I should probably only mention that, of course, the achievement of the middle group, the middle 5% on the Otis IQ was much greater over the improvement year, was much greater than either that or the top 5% or the low 5%, and the difference between boys and girls and all the rest of it. And he gives thanks for people helping him. We were out of this because I was out of this because they were telling me to get busy on my PhD. But the comprehensive test is worth a comment. Now, there was a story, last week's news, that the University of South Florida was introducing an exam which was going to mean graduation. That was it. And it was the first school that had done it. Well, I got news. Our AA degree was given for the only requirements were any 90 credits and passing 5 over 7 parts of our comprehensive exam. It was interesting because we wrote the items ourselves, revised them every year, knew about analyses where George gave us informal seminars on how we should do this. It was revised all the time, and we took it ourselves, so we knew what other people were asking. There were reasons why it would be abandoned. After all, previously the college had 4 courses that everybody had to take, and there may have been things wrong with it, but it's interesting to me that I don't think it was ever replaced by anything better. Of course, George knew about various kinds of subject matter. Although he was mostly interested in students and in teaching. The orientation of the teaching was done by George McCune, but the stuff that we learned directly was from George. They didn't have a direct mentoring system, but from the very beginning, one could just see how things were done. We could, as far as a comprehensive test, we also proctored it, by the way. Saturday morning proctoring, for some reason, didn't it used to happen on the first day of fishing season, the first day of hunting in the fall? Something like that. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. But there was George, and you could learn by the courteous, dignified, no-nonsense way that he would go proctor a large group of students in the exam. You could learn from the beginning. How did he call people by name when he came? And right at the beginning, well, he said, "This is no all." We had larger classes in math than they do now. But but what did he do? He, he gave the standard hints. You call on 5 people by name the first day, and you do it over and over. Those 5, and some later. He knew that in some cases that was not the thing to do. Once I had a student who had disappeared. It was a Native American student who'd done very well, and he explained to me that when we called on, he was probably back up at the reservation, how you deal with this. I shared an office in Falwell Hall shortly after the time that we just heard about by our first speaker. The dedication to the students, the patience that we had with everybody, how often he was willing to explain things over and over again were just legendary. Alan mentioned the one facet of his courtesy. I think I once got him to go through a door first, but I don't remember how I did it. But that was very, very difficult. He would follow students around. Now, there wasn't anything extraordinary about this immense rapport he had with individual students. While I shared that office, you could see one after another come in, but he usually had all the time in the world, but once it looked like he really wanted to go. Where he was going, turned out a student of his had been incarcerated up at St. Cloud, and he was going up to visit him. He was an inspiration to students, to teaching assistants. Tom Ressler, if you don't say something about that, well, that's okay. Part of this loyalty business goes farther. We had such a time working on this thing that I, for one, decided on staying with General College because of this business of working with people, what they thought was important, what wasn't. I don't know whether people can understand now what the situation was about getting a PhD in 1957-58. People said that if you had one, mine was in chemistry, people said, well, look, if you don't worry about this, if you don't get a job now, wait 2 years. Those baby boomers hitting, all schools are going to be hiring people. We were not worried about a job getting at all. But we wanted to stay with General College. With me, the money was easier in the first place because the alternative in industrial jobs was double what any academic job would have been anyway. But we could do some other things. I tended to do some research stuff in the summer for a department. George got involved in other places. He worked, for example, on one of the first working on community programs in North Minneapolis. When I took over for a short time as a division head from Alan, he said, that this science, business, and math division has at least 12 or 13 programs elsewhere teaching in Rochester, in the prisons up at Stillwater. He wondered about these, how you can, well, one way to try to find them is to follow the payrolls or the budgets of various groups and look for, I won't mention the name because he's not here, for what that person is. Well, that would have done absolutely no good with George McCutcheon because he did so many jobs without getting paid. And he did them all over, and I hope some people mentioned some of the other many, many, many things he did while he was with the college and afterwards, because there are many, many people who were touched by him in addition to all of us.